Have you ever wondered what mysteries lie buried beneath the waters of the great flood, so dark and terrifying that even the angels dare not whisper of them? What if I told you that the true horror didn't end when the giants were wiped out, but began with the women who gave birth to them? These were not ordinary women, but souls who chose passion over obedience, who embraced the fire of desire instead of the light of purity. They fell in love with beings from another realm, fallen angels who dared to defy God's will. And for that choice, they paid a price that history has been reluctant to recount until this very day. This is not merely a tale of rebellion, but of consequences hidden in the shadows of what unfolded when the heavens trembled, when the Nephilim were drowned, when the earth was cleansed by floodwaters. Yet, when the waves receded, one judgment remained unfulfilled, a cold, unrelenting judgment that only one could carry out. Archangel Michael, the commander of heaven's army, the sharp sword of divine justice. What sends shivers down your spine is not the punishment of the angels, but the fate of the wives, women who ventured into darkness. Michael's actions were not just punishment. They were a mark etched forever into the spiritual realm. Are those souls still calling to us from the depths of the ocean, transformed into sirens, their songs drenched in sorrow and wrath? Before we step behind this veil of mystery, comment 888 if you feel this story stirring your heart. We are deeply grateful to those who journey with this channel, bringing their light to uncover truths long forgotten. Stay with us, for the deeper we go, the more secrets will be unveiled. Michael's actions were not merely judgment, they were a prophecy, and once you hear it, you may never see ancient stories the same way again. Are you ready to face the unknown? Let's begin. High above, where eternal light reigns, the heavenly realm is a place of perfection where all is pure and orderly. Palaces of emerald gleam under divine radiance, hymns of praise echo like an endless river, and the angels, God's messengers and warriors, carry out their duties with unwavering loyalty. Forged from light, they know no desire, bear no frailty of the flesh. Their purpose is as clear as crystal: to glorify holiness, preserve the beauty of creation, and stand as sentinels of divine law. Every song they sing, every action they take, reflects the will of God, the one who created them to serve and protect the harmony of the universe. But then, in the stillness of eternity, something began to stir. One day, as the gaze of the angels, referred to as sons of God in Genesis 6:2, crossed the boundary between heaven and earth, they looked down upon the world below. What they saw was not chaos or sin, at least not yet. They beheld a different kind of beauty, unlike the perfect light of heaven or the glory of the stars. It was the beauty of humanity, women of mankind, with their intense emotions, gentle strength, and fragile allure of mortality. This beauty was imperfect, but that very imperfection awakened a strange sensation in the hearts of beings not created to yearn. Have you ever wondered what could make a divine being forged from eternal light become captivated by worldly things? How could angels, who once sang before God's throne, be drawn to the frailty of human flesh? It was not a fleeting glance, but a moment of destiny, a small spark with the power to set the heavens ablaze. As recorded in Genesis 6:2, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took as wives any they chose. This moment, that first glance, was more than admiration. It was the beginning of a chain reaction, a rebellion, a corruption, and ultimately, a divine judgment that would shake both heaven and earth. The temptation began as a whisper, soft as a breeze passing through the golden fields of heaven. At first, the angels were merely curious, like children peering through a forbidden door. But with each glance at the earth, each moment they lingered to watch women singing by rivers, laughing under the sun, or sharing stories by firelight, that whisper grew louder. It was no longer curiosity, but a fierce longing, a fire igniting in hearts, meant only to hold God's light. They began to wonder what made human beauty, though fleeting, so powerfully alluring. Could it be the brevity of their lives, their fragility, that stirred these immortal beings? This question is not just for the angels, but for us. Have you ever felt an inexplicable pull, something drawing you across boundaries you know you shouldn't cross? The angels, though divine, were not immune to temptation. They stood at a crossroads. Remain faithful to their divine purpose, or let their hearts be led by an emotion they had never known. That moment, that glance, was the genesis of a great tragedy, a tragedy that would not only alter their fate, but drag the entire world into a storm of judgment. Within the hearts of the angels, a silent battle began. They were created to obey, to worship, to reflect the light of the Almighty. Every fiber of their being was designed to praise holiness, to safeguard the order of creation. But as their eyes turned repeatedly to the earth, a small shadow crept into their minds. The light of heaven, once pure and steadfast, began to flicker like a candle before a gust of wind. Temptation was no longer a passing thought. It was a powerful pull, a burning flame in hearts not meant to feel desire. They remembered well the glory of heaven, palaces shimmering with gem-like light, hymns resounding through eternal realms, and God's throne radiating brilliance. They recalled the honor of bearing his light, of standing as guardians of divine law. Yet, with every thought of abandoning heaven, a pang of guilt arose, like a sharp blade slicing through their souls. They knew the boundary they approached was not just forbidden, it was sacred. They knew crossing it meant defying the one who created them. But then, another thought, stronger and more seductive, emerged. What if there is something more? This question, simple yet dangerous, began to echo in their minds. Could humans, frail and fleeting, open a door to experiences angels could never know? Could they feel the warmth of a mortal touch, the pain intertwined with the joy of human love? Could they understand what it means to be known, not as a messenger or warrior, but as a beloved? These questions, once unthinkable, became a flame they could not extinguish. As Isaiah 14:12-14 warns of Lucifer, "I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." Desire outside God's will is the seed from which all rebellion sprouts. Have you ever faced a choice you knew was wrong, but its allure was so strong your heart wavered? The angels, though divine beings, faced that same struggle. Each glance at the earth brought them closer to the forbidden line. They began to dream of something they were not permitted to have. Human love, with all its intensity, fragility, and complexity. God's light, once their sole source of life, was now overshadowed by the darkness of desire. They stood on the edge, torn between what they were created to be and what they secretly yearned for. This shift did not happen in a single moment. It was a slow process, like water wearing down stone. Each day the earth's pull grew stronger. Each day they lingered longer in their duties, their gazes wandering to the fields, villages, and faces of the women below. They began to wonder, could human love fill a void that even heaven's glory could not touch? Could they taste the joy and pain intertwined, known only to mortals? These questions were not mere curiosity. They were the start of a betrayal, a rebellion that would shake both heaven and earth. Below, in small villages and sprawling fields, the women lived simple lives, unaware of the cosmic drama unfolding above. They baked bread, sang folk songs, tended to crops, and shared stories by firelight as night fell. They were ordinary souls, carrying the joys and sorrows of mortal life. But in their innocence, they did not realize that the eyes of angels were watching, not to protect, but to desire. Gradually, a strange sensation began to weave into their lives. It was not fear, yet not peace either. It was an invisible current, like standing outdoors just before a storm when the wind stills and the air grows heavy with mystery. They felt as though unseen eyes were watching, not from humans, but from another realm with an intensity they could not explain. Have you ever sensed an invisible presence, as if someone is watching you, not with malice, but with an attention that makes your heart race? That is what these women experienced. Suddenly, ordinary days became extraordinary. The breeze brushing their faces carried a strange sensation, as if it held unspoken secrets. At night, the silence seemed to whisper, as if the sky itself were telling a story they weren't ready to hear. Each heartbeat grew louder, each glance over their shoulder more urgent. They felt chosen, noticed, but did not understand why. The sky appeared normal, yet something in the air hinted at a coming change. Not just in the clouds, but in the very fabric of the world. Imagine walking through a field and suddenly feeling an invisible energy, as if the universe itself is watching you. These women did not know that their smiles, their laughter, their grace had become the focal point of a spiritual battle. They were unaware that their simple beauty had drawn angels from the heights of glory. The invisible barrier between heaven and earth was thinning, and deep within, they sensed that life as they knew it stood on the edge of transformation. As Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us, there is a time for everything and a season for every purpose under heaven. But what happens when heavenly beings try to force a season God never intended? These women, though unwittingly, became part of a story written long before their birth. They did not know that their presence was becoming the catalyst for a great tragedy, one that would shake both heaven and earth. In the heavens, tension mounted. The angels, once warriors of light, now faced an irreversible choice. They knew full well the cost of defying God's will. They understood that the boundary between heaven and earth was sacred, etched into the fabric of creation. Yet the pull of desire had become an irresistible force. Day after day they gathered in secret, their eyes no longer fixed on God's throne but on the fields and villages of the earth below. Finally, a group of 200 angels, led by a being named Samjaza, made a fateful decision. They forged a covenant, a vow bound by fear and desire. As recorded in the Book of Enoch, they swore to descend to earth together, to take human women as wives, and to live as mortals. This vow was not just a personal act. It was a collective rebellion, a betrayal against the Creator. They knew that if only one descended, they would face judgment alone. By swearing together, they hoped to share the burden of their sin, an illusion that their numbers could shield them from God's wrath. Have you ever faced a choice you knew was wrong, but the sense of unity with others pushed you forward? These angels, though divine, were not so different from us. Their vow was a dark moment, a point of no return. They were not just abandoning their duties, they were challenging the very order of creation. They wanted to taste human love, to live among beings they were only meant to protect from afar. But they did not foresee the consequences. That vow, spoken in the shadows of heaven, was the final spark that ignited a fire destined to consume the world. It did not merely change the angels' fate. It pulled the entire earth into a whirlwind of chaos and judgment. As they set foot on the earth, the air trembled with a strange enchantment, as if creation itself sensed the violation. The women, once carefree, became the center of a story they did not choose. And the world, once God's garden, began to feel the first tremors of a storm that would not only shake the earth but shatter the boundaries between heaven and the mortal realm. When the fallen angels set foot on the earth, carrying their forbidden desires and treacherous vows, the world witnessed the birth of a race that belonged to no realm. They were the Nephilim, the offspring of an unholy union between angels and humans, beings who bore the blood of both heavenly glory and mortal fragility. As recorded in Genesis 6:4, The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of men and had children with them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. But their renown was not a light of salvation, it was a shadow of terror. Imagine a child born with the strength of an angel but without divine restraint, possessing a human heart yet lacking the conscience to guide it. The Nephilim were not ordinary children. From their first cry, they were different. They were too large for wooden cradles, too powerful to be swaddled in soft cloth. Their bodies grew at an unnatural pace, as if driven by a force beyond the laws of creation. Their tiny hands could snap branches, their tender feet could shake the ground. As they grew, their shadows swallowed entire village paths, and their eyes, gleaming with supernatural wisdom, made even the bravest tremble. Have you ever wondered what happens when the power of heaven merges with human desire? The Nephilim were the answer, but not one of hope, rather a living warning. They were the forbidden fruit of rebellion, beings God never intended to exist. Their bodies were a strange fusion, towering like mountains, mighty as storms, yet their minds carried the chaos of both worlds. From their fathers, the fallen angels who witnessed the creation of the universe, they inherited ancient knowledge. But from their mothers, they carried intense emotions, jealousy, pride, anger, flames unchecked by compassion or humility. Each step of the Nephilim was a declaration of their unnatural existence. As they walked through fields, the earth cracked under their weight. When they roared, the sound echoed like thunder across distant mountains. They were not just giants in body, but the embodiment of a cosmic mistake, a fracture in the perfect tapestry of creation. Can you imagine a world where such beings roamed freely, unbound by law or morality? That was the world the earth had become. A place where God's light was overshadowed by the darkness of those who belonged to no realm. The Nephilim were not merely giant beings. They were living nightmares, the embodiment of uncontrollable destruction. Their strength surpassed all human limits. A single swing of their hand could tear through a village's stone walls. A single punch could level an entire forest. They needed no weapons, for their bodies were weapons, war machines forged from angelic blood and mortal flesh. But this power brought neither peace nor protection. It brought only chaos, suffering, and a fear that spread across the earth. Imagine living in a small village where each morning is a miracle, with sunlight streaming through fields and birds singing in the trees. Then, one day, the ground trembles. Not from an earthquake, but from the footsteps of a Nephilim. Trees sway, birds fall silent, and the air grows heavy with dread. They arrived unannounced, taking whatever they desired. Livestock, crops, even people. Nothing was sacred. Nothing was safe. As the Book of Enoch chillingly describes, they consumed all the possessions of men, and when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. The Nephilim did not destroy merely to satisfy physical hunger. They were intelligent, cunning, and ruthless. They knew how to speak, to reason, to plan. Some stood tall as towers, their shadows blotting out the sun. Others were broad as city gates, with hands that could crush entire armies. But the most terrifying aspect was not their strength or size, it was their utter lack of mercy. They knew no compassion, no understanding of the value of life. When they looked down at humans, they saw not souls created by God, but mere objects to satisfy their insatiable hunger. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to live in constant fear, not of storms or wild beasts, but of beings with human forms yet monstrous actions? Entire cities trembled at the mention of the Nephilim's name. Farmers abandoned their fields, fishermen ceased sailing, markets closed, and children were hidden in dark corners. People whispered their names with trembling lips, praying not to draw their attention. But the Nephilim came relentlessly, like storms that never ceased. They took everything without apology, leaving behind ruined villages, shattered families, and hearts haunted by wordless fear. Imagine a world where it's no longer safe to step outside, where every strange sound could signal a Nephilim approaching. That was the reality humanity faced. These giants were not just a threat to villages. They were a threat to the very balance of creation. They were living proof of the consequences of crossing divine boundaries, and their presence was a curse weighing heavily upon the earth. Under the dominion of the Nephilim, the earth, once God's beautiful garden, became a battlefield of darkness and blood. The presence of these giants caused not only physical destruction, but also the moral decay of the entire world. Humans, created in God's image, began to lose the light within their souls. Fear and despair spread like an incurable plague. The values that once bound communities, kindness, honesty, faith, were replaced by selfishness, violence, and the worship of these giant beings as false gods. As Genesis 6:5 records, the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. This corruption stemmed not only from the Nephilim, but also from humanity itself, as people began to emulate the giants' arrogance and cruelty. Villages once vibrant with campfires and laughter became fortresses of fear. Songs of praise to God were replaced by desperate pleas or, worse, worship of the Nephilim as counterfeit deities. Imagine a world where the light of hope is extinguished, where each day is a struggle for survival, not only against the Nephilim, but against the corruption within human hearts. Mothers no longer told fairy tales to their children, but whispered warnings about the giants prowling in the dark. Fathers no longer taught their sons to farm or hunt, but how to hide and pray. The earth, once declared very good by God at creation, became a place where the cries of the innocent rose to heaven like smoke. Have you ever wondered what happens when a world loses its covenant with its creator? As the Nephilim roamed, the earth bore not only the weight of their steps, but also the shattering of divine order. Mountains, once symbols of eternity, trembled under their power. Rivers, once bearers of life, became refuges for those fleeing. And God, from his throne, looked down with profound sorrow. He saw his creation distorted, his beloved humans crushed by the very consequences of the rebellion he had forbidden. This corruption was not just physical devastation. It was a spiritual wound, a breaking of the covenant between God and creation. Every cruel act of the Nephilim, every village destroyed, every soul lost, was a reminder that violating divine boundaries always leads to destruction. The earth groaned under the weight of sin, and its cries reached the heavens, pleading for a deliverance only God could provide. High upon his eternal throne, God looked down on the earth with eyes both loving and just. He heard the cries of the innocent, saw the ruined villages, and felt the pain of a creation distorted. His patience, though vast, was not infinite. As the earth sank into chaos, heaven began to stir. A war unlike any before was being prepared, led by God's mightiest warriors, the archangels. Michael, the commander of heaven's army, stood at the forefront with a sword blazing with justice. Beside him were Gabriel, the messenger of God's word, Uriel, the flame of truth, and Raphael, the healer turned warrior. They were not mere symbols of peace, but generals forged in the fire of divine justice. They knew this war was unlike any other. They faced not demons or fallen spirits, but hybrid beings, the Nephilim, bearing angelic blood yet driven by chaos and desire. Can you imagine a heavenly army with wings shimmering with light and swords forged from God's own glory, preparing to confront giants as tall as mountains? The archangels did not act in haste. Every step was calculated, every strike planned with heavenly wisdom. The Nephilim might be cunning, swift, and filled with rage, but they couldn't match the power of warriors serving the Most High. As Romans 12:19 declares, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord." This was not just a battle. It was a divine judgment, and Michael, sword in hand, carried the full weight of God's will. Picture heaven assembling its forces, radiant legions stretching across the skies, their light outshining the stars. They fought not merely for victory, but for the restoration of creation's order. The Nephilim, though mighty, were not invincible. They were products of rebellion, and every rebellion has an answer from heaven. Every corrupted being must face the purifying fire, and every rising darkness will be struck down by God's plan. As the archangels prepared, the air on earth grew heavier. Animals grew restless. The wind carried a strange sound, as if creation itself held its breath before an impending event. Humans, trapped between the terror of the Nephilim and the silence of heaven, began to sense a shift. They did not know that above, a great judgment was being readied, not just to punish, but to cleanse the earth of what did not belong. Michael, with steadfast eyes and an unwavering heart, stood ready. His sword was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of justice, poised to sever the cords of rebellion and restore light to a world drowning in darkness. As the earth sank into the darkness of corruption, as the cries of the innocent mingled with the roars of the giants, God, from his eternal throne, issued an unprecedented decree. He could not allow his creation, once declared very good in Genesis 1:31, to continue being distorted by beings that did not belong. His patience, vast as the heavens, had reached its limit, and so a divine storm was summoned. Not an ordinary rain, but a flood bearing the power of judgment. As recorded in Genesis 7:11-12, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Imagine a world where the sky does not merely darken, but becomes a pitch-black curtain, as if light itself were swallowed by God's wrath. Have you ever stood beneath a storm and felt the universe tremble, as if nature were sighing in pain? That is what the earth endured, magnified a millionfold. Clouds did not drift. They loomed, heavy and motionless, like sentinels of judgment. The wind did not blow. It howled, carrying a sound not of air, but of creation's lament. Then the rain came, not as nurturing drops for crops, but as liquid blades, crashing down like hammers from above. The rain did not fall randomly. It carried purpose, not only to submerge, but to purify, to erase what had defiled God's intent. Water gushed from the earth's depths as if the earth itself wept for the wounds it bore. Rivers burst their banks in moments, valleys turned to seas, and mountains, once symbols of eternity, sank beneath the waves. This was no mere storm. It was God's sorrow made manifest, the final verdict for a world that had strayed too far from his path. The Nephilim, giants who once prided themselves on unmatched strength, now faced an enemy they could not defeat. They, who had torn through stone walls and uprooted forests, became powerless. They fled, scrambling to the highest peaks, clinging to rocks like desperate beasts. But the waters rose relentlessly. The waves, unyielding, swallowed mountains as if they had never existed. Can you imagine the moment when a giant, towering like a spire, felt fear for the first time? Their roars, once shaking cities, now blended into the howl of the flood. Their strength, their wisdom, their stature, all meaningless before the wrath of the Creator. The flood was not just water, it was a symbol of righteousness. It did not only destroy, it cleansed, like a fire consuming the impure. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain fell without ceasing, as if heaven wept for a world that had lost its light. Each drop was a reminder that no power, whether angelic or giant, could stand against God's will. As the waves engulfed everything, from humble villages to proud fortresses, the earth became a boundless ocean, a mirror reflecting the anger and sorrow of the Most High. Amid the divine storm, amid the howling winds and destructive waters, a small but unquenchable spark endured. Noah's Ark. While the world drowned in darkness, this simple wooden vessel floated like a flickering flame in a sea of sorrow. It was not just a boat. It was a covenant, God's promise to those who held fast to faith amid corruption. As recorded in Genesis 7:16, then the Lord shut him in. That door, sealed by God's own hand, was a symbol of protection, of hope amid destruction. Imagine being Noah, standing within wooden walls, hearing the waves crash ferociously outside. Each roar of the water was a reminder of a world dissolving. Each tremor of the ark testified to the storm's divine power. Inside, Noah and his family huddled with the animals, their hearts pounding, yet their faith unshaken. They knew this ark was built not just of wood and pitch, but of God's very promise. Have you ever wondered how much faith it takes to stand firm when the entire world collapses around you? Outside the ark, the cries of those left behind pierced through the rain and wind. Those who had mocked Noah, who had scoffed at his warnings, now pounded on the hull, begging for rescue. Parents called for their children, friends screamed in desperation, but the door was sealed. It was not Noah who refused them. God himself had locked the entrance. His judgment was final, and no plea could alter it. Imagine the pain of hearing those cries, knowing you could not open the door, that their fate was sealed. That was the burden Noah bore, but also the testament to his faithfulness. The ark floated amid an endless ocean, lifted by waves that had swallowed mountains. Fields vanished, forests dissolved, and humanity's proud fortresses were swept away like dust. Yet the ark stood firm, not by its own strength, but by the hand of God shielding it. It was the last flame of hope, a reminder that even in wrath, God reserves a place for mercy. Each heartbeat of Noah, each breath of the creatures aboard, declared that righteousness would always find a way to survive, no matter how deeply the world sank. The ark did not merely save lives. It saved the future. It carried the seeds of a new world, a chance for the earth to be reborn. But even as the ark floated, the story was not over. Beyond, beneath the raging waves, the fate of those who caused this chaos awaited. Not salvation, but a punishment far beyond death. While the earth drowned in floodwaters, the fallen angels, those who sparked this tragedy with their desire and betrayal, were not spared their consequences. Once radiant beings, messengers of light, they were now imprisoned in eternal darkness. As recorded in 2 Peter 2:4, "For God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment." These chains were not merely physical, they were symbols of righteousness, binding those who dared defy God's will. Imagine these angels who once soared through heaven with shimmering wings, who sang praises echoing through eternity, now confined in the darkest abysses. They did not merely lose their freedom, they lost their very essence, but their punishment did not end with imprisonment. The most horrific part was being forced to witness the destruction of the legacy they created. They saw their Nephilim children, their pride, swallowed by the waves. They heard the cries of their wives, those who loved them, now trapped in anguish and despair. Have you ever considered the pain of watching what you cherish most be destroyed, powerless to intervene? Their punishment was a nightmare without escape. Each scream of a Nephilim consumed by the waters, each cry of a wife left behind, was a dagger piercing their souls. They could not close their eyes, could not turn away, could not flee the reality they had wrought. Once warriors of light, they became helpless spectators of devastation. The cities they helped build with forbidden knowledge, the kingdoms the Nephilim ruled, all crumbled beneath the waves. Their rebellion, once painted with beauty and passion, was now mere ashes in the dark. This punishment was not just confinement, it was spiritual torment. They felt the pain of their wives, the madness of minds haunted by sin, and the shattering of dreams they once promised. As Jude 1:6 describes, "And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day." These chains did not merely bind their bodies, but locked their consciousness, forcing them to live forever with the memory of their betrayal. They chose human love over God's glory, and now they paid with an eternal, inescapable pain. But the story does not end with the destruction of the Nephilim or the imprisonment of the fallen angels. Another group faced judgment: the wives, the women who embraced forbidden love and gave birth to the giants. They survived the flood, but their survival was not mercy. It was the beginning of a punishment more horrific than death. Leading this judgment was Archangel Michael, the commander of heaven's army, bearer of the sword of divine justice. These wives had loved the fallen angels with all their hearts. They were captivated by supernatural beauty, by sweet promises of a love beyond this world. But when the flood waters receded, they were left on a desolate earth, facing the ruins of their misguided choices. Some fell to their knees in agony, begging for forgiveness, their tears mingling with the dust. Others, like Nama, refused to bow. Nama, with beauty like silk and a voice like fire, was once the center of attention. She not only loved an angel, she led other women down the forbidden path, wearing her guilt like a cloak of pride. God, whose justice sees through every mask, did not let their pride go unpunished. The punishment for these wives was not death, but a fate more haunting. They were transformed into sirens, half human, half beast creatures, cursed to live in the depths of the ocean. As Jude 1:13 describes those who defy God, they are wild waves of the sea, foaming up their shame. Imagine that fate, still bearing enchanting beauty, voices like music, eyes sparkling like stars, but all of it a curse. Their beauty became a weapon, luring sailors to destruction, just as they were once lured by the fallen angels. Have you ever considered being trapped in a beautiful form, yet your heart torn by memories of mistakes? These sirens were not the romantic figures of fairy tales. They were living warnings, imprisoned in the ocean, their jail and their stage. Each song they sang was a reminder of their betrayal. Each glance they gave a curse, drawing others into darkness. Michael, as the enforcer of justice, oversaw this transformation. His sword did not strike flesh, but carved their fate into eternity. He stood there, not with satisfaction, but with the solemnity of a warrior fulfilling God's will. The vast, unforgiving ocean became the prison of these souls. They sang, but no one heard joy. They glided through waves, but never found freedom. Memories of the days they loved, the days they bore the Nephilim, and the days they watched the world collapse haunted them like specters beneath the water. Some went mad, hearing the cries of the drowned each time they closed their eyes. Others grew numb, carrying a pain too deep to express. But all shared a common curse. They were proof of the consequences of crossing divine boundaries, echoes of a tragedy still resonating through time. Now you have seen the veil lifted. The story of the great flood does not end with the waves. The earth may have been cleansed, but its echoes still ripple through time in the mournful songs of the sirens, in the pained silence of the fallen angels, and in the watchful gaze of heaven. This is not just an ancient tale, not merely a myth buried in dusty pages. It is a mirror, reflecting the truth that the choices we make, whether for love, passion, or desire, can pull the world into a storm of consequences. What will you do when you stand at the crossroads of temptation, when something beautiful but forbidden beckons? Will you have the strength to turn away, or will you cross the sacred boundary as those wives did? This story reminds us that even love, when it defies God's will, can become a fire that consumes everything. If these words have touched you, prompting you to reflect on the sirens in your own life, share your thoughts in the comments below to let us know you're awake and listening. Like this video, share it with those who need to hear this story, and subscribe to our channel to join us in uncovering more hidden truths. We cherish every moment you spend with us, every light you bring to make this story heard. Even if you've never contributed, your presence is a gift. May you walk in wisdom, protected by truth, and always recognize the temptations waiting to pull you from the light. Be strong, faithful, and chosen. We'll see you in the next video, where more secrets await to be revealed.